Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Ciecko, and I'm the founder of Cuseum. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us today, our speakers, our attendees, and of course, the Western Museums Association for putting this together. It's a real pleasure to be able to moderate this discussion today. Today's webinar is brought to you by a collaboration between Cuseum, Cultural Innovations, and the Western Museums Association. We are excited to provide a look at how foundations, funders, and the overall philanthropic landscape for museums and cultural institutions is shaping. All of this with an international perspective. Across the world, museums and cultural institutions are facing the financial implications of COVID-19. Over 90% of the museums worldwide had to shut down and close temporarily due to the pandemic, and organizations of all shapes and sizes are bracing for the financial impact and changes caused by these closures. Over the past 4 months, everything has shifted. Traditional means of cultivating, soliciting, and stewarding donors have shifted, and many of the traditional touch points between organizations and donor, including the on-site experience, special events, fundraisers, and galas are no longer possible due to the restrictions around COVID-19. So today's webinar, we will be specifically addressing how the current situation has affected philanthropic giving, how museums are communicating with donors about systemic injustice, and how we can work with donors to measure impact effectively. Our hope is that as organizations seek to recover financially and to adapt financially, this webinar will help them better plan for the future and how to more effectively navigate these changes to ensure their own financial sustainability. Well, without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce all of our special guests for today's conversation. Joining us, we have Brian Carter. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian. Brian is the Executive Director of For Culture. Before his arrival at For Culture, he held prominent positions in the arts and heritage field, including Deputy Director and Head Curator of the Northwest African American Museum, Museum Director of the Oregon Historical Society, and Director of Interpretation at the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture. He has formerly served as Board President of the Association of African American Museums, as well as formerly on the board of the Washington Museums Association. Thanks so much for joining us, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also joining us, we have Lori Fogarty. Lori is the Director and CEO of the Oakland Museum of California, a multidisciplinary museum that brings together collections of art, history, and natural sciences. Since 2006, Lori has worked to oversee and guide all museum programmatic and administrative operations, as well as lead the museum's $63 million capital campaign and building renovation project. Lori has received major recognition in the museum and nonprofit field as the recipient of the John Cotton Dana Award for Leadership from the American Alliance of Museums and the Hank Russo Outstanding Fundraiser Professional Award from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Lori's previous roles include Executive Director of the Bay Area Discovery Museum and Senior Deputy Director at SF MoMA. Thank you so much for joining us, Lori. And I was just reading an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that just popped up in one of my feeds, which details some of Lori's vision for the museum in relation to some of the topics we'll be discussing today. So I just have to say I'm even more excited about today's conversation. And joining us from across the deep blue sea is Morton Wright. Ben is the President and Group CEO at Global Philanthropic, one of the leading worldwide strategy consultancy firms focused on the philanthropic sector. At Global Philanthropic, Ben has gained recognition as a major gift strategist, an expert in structuring international campaigns, and a specialist on higher education and Asian philanthropy. Ben is on the board at Goldsmiths University and speaks regularly on the topics of philanthropic issues around the world. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben. And lastly, I'm Brendan Ciecko. I'm the founder of Cuseum, a company that helps museums and cultural institutions drive visitor, member, and donor engagement using the power of technology. I will be your host for today's conversation. So let's dig in to our questions and topics for today. So over the past month, illumination has taken place around systemic injustice that remains entrenched in our country and our institutions. Museums as mission-based organizations committed to their communities have taken strides both through statements and action to address racism. What role do museums and cultural institutions have in addressing systemic injustice? And what conversations are you having and what responses are you hearing from funders about how a museum stance might impact its ability to secure funding? So open that up for anyone to jump into.
I'm happy to give it a start because it's something that is very much a focus for the Oakland Museum of California right now. I do think that museums, of course, have a role to play in considering issues related to equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and justice. It's been really a core part of the work at the Oakland Museum of California for a long time, but I would say you know, the ante has been upped in these last few weeks. And I think it is an and both. I think the work begins internally within the organization itself and with both the board and the staff. And so for us, on the board side, we are very fortunate to be part of AAM's Facing Change initiative, which is really looking to support museums over a 2-year period in enhancing board diversity. And that includes trainings, it includes tools for recruitment, and really internal capacity building. So our board is deep now in not only thinking about organizational principles and policies, but also personal work and their own journeys to consider their own power and privilege and their own understanding of the issues. Similarly, now on the staff side, we are deepening the commitment to DEIA work, but also now forming a process where the staff is really sharing in a much more direct way in decision-making and understanding of our financial challenges. So actually not separating kind of equity and inclusion work from day-to-day work and the challenges that we're all facing operationally and financially, but actually bringing the staff into a much more central role in that consideration. And then, of course, there's the audience and programming piece. And I think what's really interesting, there have been some recent studies about how museums are one of the few trusted institutions and anchor organizations in communities. And I think our communities are really looking to us to respond to community need right now and to be places where there can be real dialogue. You know, an attempt, as Brian Stevenson would say, toward truth and reconciliation. So it's inside out and it's outside in.
Thank you, thank you. And Brian, I'd love to hear from your perspective on this, especially from the standpoint that, you know, you've been involved with African American museums for quite some time, as well as the fact that at For Culture, you're working with organizations of different shapes and sizes and resources. What role are you seeing the philanthropic dialogue play around the commitment to addressing systemic injustice and really using this as an opportunity to rethink all things and do right by as many groups as possible?
Yeah, I think it's a complex issue, and I'll just echo what Lori said about what I feel is the role of museums in this morning. Then I'll segue into what I believe the responsibilities of funders are. I always see museum work as a series of interlocking rights and also responsibilities. And in this particular moment, I think there's a danger in the museum field and also within the funding sector and grant making sector of abstracting the danger that the Black community faces at this moment. And there's the solidarity statements that have come out in response to the George Floyd murder, solidarity statements of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think those are a necessary evolutionary step, but what we're really talking about is the death of Black bodies at the hands of law enforcement. What we're talking about is an inequity of the criminal justice system. What we're talking about is disproportionate number of Black and brown people in jails. And I feel that museums and also cultural philanthropy has the ability, and I think it's just the background and the closeness to the academy of abstracting it. And I think the internal work around DEI is necessary. I think a burgeoning understanding and trainings around the importance of racial equity is crucial, but the core issue, right, is there are Black bodies that are piling up in the streets. And so what do we do about that? What is that actual responsibility? I think that the internal, whether it's reorganization or education or re-education is necessary. But for me, I think we within the cultural sector have the ability right now to pick up and light our torches off the flame that a lot of social justice activists keep alive for us in between these really seminal events. So George Floyd, right, dies, but there was another Black man, another Black woman who died before, and there will be yet one more a month from now. And in between those, right, when we are not issuing solidarity statements, when we're not having emergency board meetings, there are a group of activists and community leaders and passionate grassroots folks who are constantly fighting this fight. So for me, I feel the responsibility is, how can museums find ways to support that activism that happens truthfully when we are not putting up blog posts and we're not putting up Facebook posts? And I think that is the mark of success of museums right now, is how can they actively support those organizations and those individuals that are using, right, cultural strategies, interventions to keep these social justice movements going. So it's the support of those individuals and organizations as opposed to what we are doing internally to make ourselves feel better. And I think pivoting now to what I see in the funding sector, I mean, there was the blackout and everybody did it. There was the solidarity statement. I saw people coming out with Juneteenth posts, which I've never seen before. Somebody who celebrated Juneteenth my entire life, I had never seen that before. So I am concerned about a certain opportunism. I'm concerned about a certain inertia that happens within the digital space. And I think what I'm really looking for when I talk about equity is the movement and the reallocation of funds to those that are on the front lines of these fights. And I feel museums have the ability to do that. And I feel like funders have the responsibility to really find those wonderful like nexus, those intersections where culture and social justice movement support exists.
Thank you for that, Brian. The really powerful statements, and just even realizing that we need to move away from abstraction and stay true to what is actually happening and what actions should be and can be taken. So I loved hearing your thoughts about how the museum and how the cultural institution can be a platform in supporting the already existing great activist work. And I know we're seeing a lot of institutions explore this right now, and some institutions step up to the plate because they have been doing that for quite some time. So that's really, really great to hear your perspective. And I know, Ben, you're across the Atlantic, you're in the UK. Do you have any thoughts? Are you seeing anything from a global perspective? It feels like right now conversations about injustice and inequality are shaping all forms of philanthropy. Like, we're seeing a lot of shift in giving and a lot of shift in thinking about this moment, both as, the pandemic, a recession, social injustice being at this peak, this really pivotal moment in time. What are you seeing from a global perspective?
I might just, pick up and reflect from the UK perspective on this. And so it is very much a global phenomenon, and quite rightly too, in terms of the context that we see. And I've got kind of two thoughts on that in terms of sort of two spectrums of how to look at the impact of this. And you're probably aware or not of the Edward Colston statue issue around Bristol. Is a huge philanthropist, died in 1721 and was absolutely linked to the slave trade, and as the statue was removed, and there's been a big debate around that, and I think that's kind of become a very big issue around statues, which is, I know in the US has become a big issue, and that's, this has made everyone in a very healthy way reflect on why were these statues still there, why was interpretive actions not taken to look at these things before that had to happen. So I think that, this is a global phenomenon. And at the same time, you have, for example, Stormzy, the rapper, I don't know if you know the British rapper, has pledged 10 million over 10 years for Black causes and social injustice. So that's encouraged the other side of philanthropy, which is, is tremendous to see. So I think, there's a lot of deep thinking and a lot of correct soul searching going on about how we interpret things and our own history in the UK. I think globally, maybe the real issue that I'd like to highlight is the whole issue around social inequalities, because, I heard it commented yesterday from a UN spokesman, talked about the fact that today we have more social inequality than we ever have in the world in terms of between the wealth and the poor. And I think that's a global phenomenon as we've never seen. And particularly the rise of huge wealth in Asia and across the world, and that wealth transition that we all know has to happen. And the role of philanthropy to facilitate that is critical. We can't carry on in a world where there is just such disparity between the wealth of the really poor and the really wealthy. And a lot of issues that relate to that tension that we're now seeing around the world, and it manifests in itself a lot of ways. We're seeing that in different guises in Asia. And so that issue of inequality and the moral obligation actually of philanthropists to step up and do more, both around social justice, but also social inequality. And that's actually critical as we move forward globally.
Thank you. And right now we're all tuning into the near term and the long term impacts of the pandemic on philanthropic giving. And according to some research published by Fidelity Charitable, most donors do not plan to shift their giving to different organizations in light of the pandemic. They'll stay the course by continuing to support their favorite nonprofits, but it's not entirely clear how arts and culture as a category is impacted by this. So in light of all of this uncertainty, in light of what's happening right now, are any of you noticing any early trends or things that might shift over the upcoming months and upcoming years because of what's happening right now?
Brendan, I might just come in on that. Just,
sure.
There's I appreciate the survey, and there obviously there are people stuck in their tram lines of how they've done things, but there's also a huge amount of interesting innovation. The Ford Foundation, the work around issuing bonds to raise money, the issue about actually spending down endowment ahead of time in order to help, particularly COVID related. The great success story actually that isn't often told about, the Solidarity Fund and the reaction of people to that. In terms of COVID, Solidarity Fund and the hundreds of millions that have been raised around that. The actual fact, there's foundations are actually innovating, I think, and they are responding. Some of them are throwing out the rule book and thinking about how do we do things differently. And I think for the museum and cultural arts sector, they need to be part of that. They are part of that discussion, but they also need to be driving that agenda, because the traditional ways that foundations have operated are simply too lengthy, too risk adverse, and often they're just too conservative. And in this environment, we need to move fast. And there's been some great examples, I think, of actually foundations thinking a little bit out of the box globally, doing things very immediately and actually releasing money very quickly into communities.
Thank you. And I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on this, Laurie, especially being director of an organization that's based in the Bay Area, easily regarded as like the Florence of today, as a generator of innovation, as a generator of new business models and ideas, and also the speed at which innovation happens in your region is world renowned. So I'd love to hear like your conversations with funders and foundations right now. Is that shifting? Are you seeing some new models come about? Yes. Are you seeing different vocabularies?
A little bit. I mean, I think that, I will say that our museum has not benefited a lot from the technology wealth in the Bay Area over time. But what we are seeing, I mean, I would say a few things. One is the comment about donors continuing to give to the organizations they've supported and been tried and true donors to. And we're actually seeing that. And not only seeing our donors continue with us and continue to support us, we have seen people increase their gifts because they've said at this time they want to really support the organizations they believe in. And some of that has been at our request, and some of it has just been, I think people are really looking at what are my values, what are the places I care about, what are the organizations I think are making a difference. I do think for the arts and culture field, we have needed to work much more effectively for a long time in being able to express and make our case for what the difference is that we're making in the world. And I think the organizations that can really communicate with donors about their values, what they care about, how they're shaping a vision and reimagining a vision for the future are going to be, better positioned to be able to carry on and to sustain their support. I will say what we are seeing is much more flexibility, especially in the foundation community. A lot of the foundations that we have worked with very quickly communicated with us and said that they were willing to convert project support to operating support. So that's been encouraging. I think maybe a much greater understanding in the philanthropy community about the importance of, supporting our staff and not just being wedded to, a new innovative project and project funding and incremental support to an organization, but really thinking about core support. We've seen them waive, report requirements. We did receive an invitation from a major national foundation that usually would take months to submit an application. They gave us a deadline, 10 days from when we received the email, and they turned around a decision in 2 weeks, which is like completely unheard of. And it was really COVID response for organizations in the category of giving in the arts that they saw living the values that they really wanted to support. So I do think we're going to see some shifts that may really change the landscape for philanthropy in the long term.
Thank you. And Brian, I'd love to hear from you on the standpoint of different types of organizations, large and small. I think we always want to acknowledge, organizations that are maybe a little bit smaller in a region. So looking to, the wide array of artists and cultural organizations and practitioners in King County. Love to hear your thoughts on some of the early indications you're seeing.
Sure. I feel like something that's really heartening to me is that I see a willingness on the part of funders, and here I'm talking about government funders, family foundations, corporations, to come together to increase the potential for collective impact. And often that's done through lunches and seminars. And in this case, I feel like there's a greater urgency and a willingness to perhaps integrate resources in ways that I saw philosophies and theories being integrated before COVID-19. And I think one of the positive impacts of that is that I think there is a growing awareness, and towards Lori's point, I hope this continues, that there is a growing awareness that because of COVID, that it is incredibly difficult for organizations, right, to apply, to receive funds, to wait for funds, to wait for responses. And that's across the board. And I feel like the lesson here is that is the challenge that most small organizations, which are the majority of museums in this country, face on a regular basis. It's the challenge that most undercapitalized POC-led organizations face on a regular basis. So the reason it's heartening to me is because I feel that a grace and understanding of the distance between an organization that wants to apply and a funder is being conspicuously and purposely condensed. And I see that as well with a lot of the funders here locally that are engaging with their grantees or potential grantees in ways that I have not seen before. And I feel like that, to me, I hope is a future for philanthropy, that if you want to give money, that the best way to do that is to be in really, really close proximity and conversation to those that will be receiving the funds, so that you can identify the actual obstacles that they face, as opposed to guessing or theorizing about those obstacles. And I feel like COVID has been a real kick in the ass towards that direction. So that's what I'm appreciative of.
Yeah, I would really agree with that too. I mean, I think the conversations that that are happening between organizations and funders, and really seeing some of the funders very actively reach out and say, what's going on? How are you doing? How can we help? What are the issues that you're facing? And I will say, Brian, to your point too, the coalitions, I've seen some really incredible, and this is an area where I think, some of the innovation that happens in the Bay Area, funders coming together to support small organizations and individual artists. There've been some coalitions both in Oakland and in San Francisco that came together quite quickly, and that public support was part of that. Even if the public dollars were relatively small, there was a real willingness to galvanize private and public funders together to support immediate needs, which has been heartening as well.
Yeah, I remember seeing a couple weeks ago, and maybe this is one of the examples, the Museum of African Diaspora in San Francisco, like in partnership with Artsy, like very quickly to get absolutely urgent funds into their coffers. They had something that supported both the museum and the artists, and had a number of hands on deck. So I was really impressed by that, and it looked like it came together very quickly. So I feel like I'm hearing more tunes about flexibility, more tunes about speed at which the response takes place. So that is definitely giving me optimism about what the time holds for the sector. So one of the points that we've kind of been jumping a little bit around, this role of partnership and collaboration and coalition, I'd love to hear what role partnerships and deeper types of engagements beyond the traditional exchange of sponsorship dollars for a logo or name placement play in the now, but also play in the long term, sustainable support for museums and cultural organizations.
So I think, from what I'm seeing is that sort of all bets are off about how the old world used to live, and new bets are on about how the world we're in now lives. And partnership is one of those critical fault lines that we're seeing redefined. And I think it's really amazing how many great partnerships we're seeing emerging out of the COVID crisis in response, and the way that people are just partnering with people for good reason rather than just being hostile because of the sake that they're a different organization. They're actually coming together for the mutual benefit of the cause. They're coming together to support organizations. So I think that redrawing of the boundaries, the thinking differently about how we do things, I think working together for common good. My sense is that that's a global phenomenon that's very positive, that's come out of such a traumatic event, this pandemic. And I see it as a genuine shift, and it may be a shift that's, for good. And I think it's a very positive force. So I'm certainly seeing a lot of that at the moment. That also applies to the corporate world and how they're responding. And they've been, globally, they've not been in a particularly great place in terms of corporate giving. And there is an opportunity, I think, building on what they've done around the COVID response in particular, of actually becoming in a much better place. And I think corporates also need to step up globally, and they realize the importance of their corporate philanthropy now globally.
Laurie and Brian, do you have anything to add to that about partnerships?
I would just say that I feel like an essential ingredient of partnership is codification. And I think in this moment, for all the folks who are at museums, in a lot of ways, right, funders' noses are open at this point. A lot of funders are concerned and they're scared and they're worried. They want to make sure they're doing it right, especially with COVID, right? But also this nexus, right, with a growing awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement and social justice issues. And so I would just encourage those folks at museums that as you are entering into these partnerships with funders or other cultural, right, producers, that you think about how do you memorialize these relationships and how do you gather guarantees that they can continue. So I always consider myself an institution builder, always throughout my career. I feel like right now is the opportunity. We're trying to do that locally in King County with funding, with this kind of confederation, this loose confederation of funders, of how can we write it down? How can we talk about how our values that we are expressing so absolutely freely at this moment are actually written down and agreed to? What are the terms of our engagement? How can this collaboration continue through? And I do not think that happens with good intentions, because I believe like the urgency of the moment eventually and inevitably subsides. And so right now, I think is the moment for those partnerships to be formalized when blood is running hot and people have the energy. So that's the ingredient that I think needs to be added to this partnership conversation, because the one-offs are fantastic, but they are going to go away, and they're going to go away really quickly. So being able to do that, I think, is the key to sustainability of any partnership.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is it. I'm sorry, go ahead, Brendan.
No, go ahead, Laurie.
No, I think that's so interesting that you said that, because what I have seen over the last few months is kinds of networks and coalition building that I've never experienced. So I'll give a couple of examples. One is before the shutdown happened, before the institutions closed, I was in close contact with 3 other institutions, kind of the other 3, I would say, major community cultural institutions in Oakland: the Oakland Zoo, Chabot Space and Science Center, and an organization called Children's Fairyland. We've all been around, we've known each other for years, never really worked together. And we now talk once a week, the directors of those institutions, on every single aspect from, our shutdown plans, communication, PPP, reopening plans. Similarly, in the East Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area, East Bay is one county, but multiple cities. And these cultural organizations had never really come together with any kind of advocacy efforts at our county level or state level. So we now have a group that is meeting regularly. The one that struck me when you said the codification is one of the phenomenons, and I know this is happening in cities across the country, is these incredible murals being painted on plywood barricades, on windows in businesses that came together, as part of the protests right after the George Floyd murder. And there was a real outcry from, members of the museum and elected officials. Is the museum going to do something to preserve these, to show these? And, we quickly realized this needed to be a Black-led effort, but that we had, this kind of struck me too when you said, Brian, what can museums actually do to support the social justice efforts? So what has come together is a group of organizations, Black-led organizations and artists, with cultural institutions, and now with a major construction company that is helping with making sure that they can take down the barricades and they can be safely transported. And we wrote guiding principles because one of the first things we really realized is we needed to understand and share what the intent is. This is not an art project. This is cultural expression in support of a movement that cannot be one and done with these cool murals that then go away, or somebody shows and then they go away, but that they are there to foster dialogue. And so we wrote guiding principles together, which was very powerful. And now I feel, you know, as you say this, there's much more likelihood that we will sustain this effort than, oh, we came together in the couple of weeks after this to try to do something in the heat of the moment, and then it goes away. So I really appreciate your calling attention to that.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear Brian and Lori talk about, you know, the moment to formalize those partnerships, put it down in, you know, through guiding principles and making those values really apparent so that it isn't just a flash in the pan. That's something that I think a lot of people will take in and run with. Shifting gears a little. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Could I make just one point about those? I think every city is grappling with these 8x4 plywood murals and what they're going to do with them. And I've heard so much about preservation. I'll tell you one thing my agency is working on, and that's retroactive funding of those artists who created it. And I think that's something that's essential as well. And it's not something we frequently do, right? We want to pay for it, decide what it is, and give money so that it can be done. And I think in this case, there's a really active effort that needs to be made to support the work of those artists, even if it's retroactively. So that's something we've taken on that we're exploring now. We just encourage others as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of our guiding principles. So that, you know, is compensation to the artist. So that's great. Thank you.
That's excellent, excellent. Well, shifting gears for a moment, you know, according to the National Philanthropic Trust, one of the big 2020 trends is the role that technology is playing in helping mobilize support and move capital quickly. You know, that these will continue to expand. So especially in light of COVID-19, we're witnessing a huge shift in how museums are reaching new audiences, reaching their existing audience, but new audience as well as in how people are getting philanthropically involved from a virtual and digital perspective. So I know, Ben, you spent a lot of time thinking about the communication, the language, the narrative, how it gets to people. What are you seeing around this in your own work right now? Oh, I think you're muted. I will unmute you.
Sorry. I hope you. So I was just saying that I think there are big challenges as well in this moment, as well as huge opportunities. But I think in terms of communication and engagement, we're seeing some pretty remarkable statistics in terms of rise of, as you would expect, but online giving and donations online, and the way people are interacting with organizations and donating to organizations. So I think that is a shift that we knew was going to happen at some point, and this has just lit the touch paper on that, and it's now off in a way. And I think we'll see a big climb in that graph, and many more people giving through those sort of forums. Now, of course, you know, as we'll talk probably in a moment, you know, the traditional means are also tried and tested and very effective, and trying to replace them is very difficult. I would say, though, in terms of ultra high net worths and large donors, the really surprising thing that's happened in this COVID environment is that they've actually been engaging in a way that perhaps you wouldn't expect them to, and largely that's down to the availability of individuals and the fact that they can, you know, walk to their living room and go on a Zoom call like this and listen and be engaged, as opposed to have to make a diary date and travel for miles, and they've got a zillion other things on their plate. So actually we're finding very high levels of engagement around high net worth individuals for organizations. Other examples of advisory boards, global advisory boards, we're finding hugely, you know, everyone's turning up at board meetings, which didn't happen before. So I think, you know, along those same lines of how we use technology, you know, it's a challenge of being closed. It's a challenge not having that personal interaction, but equally, actually, there's a big upside in terms of having access to people and engaging them, and their engagement as well. And they want that stimulation. I mean, you know, final thought on this is, you know, you realize, and after being locked down ourselves for several months, weeks, that, you know, culture is such an important part of your life. And people are questing for that, you know, they have a thirst for that. So I think there will be a big bounce back, a real engagement on that that comes out of this, that people really miss it and they really realize what they've missed. But I think technology can play an important role in the interim. So, you know, and at such low cost, it's good for the environment. you can really get high levels of engagement, but you have to innovate and accommodate new ways of doing things. But there are great opportunities as well.
Great, and I'd love to hear from Lori and Brian on this as well, because going out and raising funds where that has maybe historically relied on some bit of travel or group travel with patrons, lunches, dinners, all these types of activities to really kind of engage them in a very personal and one-on-one way. Those are off the table right now. So how is your museum, Lori, adopting to this moment in the digital? And Brian, I'd love to hear from you on this as well.
Yeah, I would say we're on a steep learning curve with this. I mean, I would say there's both the power of the personal phone call, and I will say especially in the first few weeks, and we do this on a regular basis, just calling people and letting them know, major donors, this is what's happening, this is what we're thinking about, how are you doing? Was really important. I think the high touch connection is important as well. What we have tried to do is digital programming for donors and for members. So we started quite early with a conversation between me and a newly appointed deputy director, and had a chance for our donors to get to know her. So some of the same formats we would have done in person, but done them digitally. And you're right. It's a lot easier to do, and we're getting very high engagement. I mean, the board meetings we've had in the last 4 months have been the best attended board meetings we've ever had. And I think there's both the sense of urgency. Obviously, the board feels a sense of responsibility and wants to know, but they're not having to travel, they're not having to commute, their schedules are more flexible. So it's encouraging to see that. And I think we also have done a lot of messages just on weekly e-news, member newsletters, but embedding video to that, which I think makes the messages much more personal and heartfelt, hopefully. So I think that's going to be, I don't think that's going away either. I mean, I think now we will hopefully get back to having in-person donor events and in-person board meetings, but I think we will rely on this technology more than ever, because people do see, I mean, we're all sick of Zoom calls right now, but we also see the ease and the way that it can make engagement possible that, might not have been possible before.
Thank you. And just adding to that, I mean, it's philanthropy with lower carbon footprint. There's, the travel
Totally.
And then this, and everyone's available. So there are all these interesting efficiencies that have been shifted into full gear.
Very much so.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a duh statement, but I feel like COVID it has revealed, right, like a really pronounced digital divide within the cultural sector. Within King County, my area of work, there are over 100 small heritage societies, most of them with either no staff member or an all volunteer staff member. These organizations are not poised or ready from either like a technical know-how, a software or hardware standpoint, to be able to capitalize on this moment and to take their gala and make it digital, to really quickly go to Zoom and Skype, and all their board meetings, all their board members are going to have internet connectivity as well as a laptop. And so one of the things that we're working on right now that I think is going to be a real significant issue is how can you provide capacity building and technical assistance to smaller museums and cultural organizations. And it's going to have to happen really, really quickly, because those organizations were at the financial margins to begin with. So I feel like if you are a larger organization and you have something called a marketing department or a communications department, right, it is easier to make that pivot. But if you do not have that, the challenge for you amidst COVID, amidst global protests, amidst working from home, are even more pronounced and dire. So I feel like that's something that the cultural philanthropy sector needs to be aware of. And unfortunately, it's not that sexy to put a laptop, a Wi-Fi hotspot, right, with a really, really small organization, but that might be the only way that small heritage society can survive, because we're not just talking, to me anyway, about the fall. We're not talking about the winter. I see this going all the way through next summer, where your ability to fundraise is going to have to happen in a digital space. So one thing, I saw this in the Q&A, there was a question about how individual artists can plug into that. And I think that this same challenge persists, is as an individual artist, what can you do in this moment, right, to keep that funding going? And I'll just give one example. Locally, there was a collective that was started to create a digital online platform. And I think this is a chance for, right, like performing artists and, you know, musicians and that kind of thing to be able to put their creative product online. And I think what we need to see, especially from smaller organizations, is a merger of that public programming and fundraising. So what I would love to see for small and mid-sized organizations is the energy and the effort that's put towards the gala, right, digitally, be spread out over a series of events that are half fundraising, half programmatic efforts. I hope that that's the future for smaller organizations.
I think that is fantastic. I think that, you know, this is one of those things where we've realized how siloed efforts can be within an organization, that there's one group that produces fundraising events and there's one group that produces public programming, and now seeing that there's this shared, you know, skill set that could be put to use. And that, you know, the interesting thing is the only way we have right now to deliver programming, value, and content, and to, you know, remain visible and make our case, is digitally. And often digital channels are really narrowly controlled within an organization, right? Meaning that it is, as you said, Brian, it's the marketing department or the communications department. Now, you know, the fundraising event or the fundraising area, the development department needs that channel, but the curatorial area needs that channel, and the education department needs that channel. And so I think one of the things I saw in the chat, you know, how will this change your brand and what will you continue, is I think really rethinking what digital engagement means and all of the purposes it needs to serve, and that it has such great potential that to extend the kind of presence that we could have for in-person events, and that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's an and both now.
Thank you. And to add on, you know, from what Brian was saying, just about emphasizing the importance of making sure that smaller organizations aren't left behind. I mean, I know that there have been just a few initiatives to drive digital literacy within organizations of every shape and size that are like just starting to happen. So like One by One over in the UK has recently been partnering with US, you know, museum associations to really promote digital literacy. But I feel like, you know, the timing of everything is kind of thrust forward. So it wouldn't surprise me if someone, and if anybody from Bloomberg Philanthropies or the Knight Foundation is listening, I think there'd be a really remarkable opportunity to fund like digital literacy boot camps for organizations of all kinds. And the difference between today and last year is you don't need to fly people to some city across the country to learn. Learning is virtual, and people have the time, the need, and the urgency to get up to, you know, to get up to the current standards, which are obviously continuing to shift day in, day out. So I really appreciate your point, Brian, around making sure that smaller organizations, you know, have a voice. They aren't getting left behind. They have access to the platforms. And Lori, you're absolutely right about the importance of digital today, and trying to make sure that it can be you know, utilized in a cross-departmental way to promote all of these elements. So one of the points that, you know, I heard in the last couple of moments, or rather just even the term gala as a fundraiser. So I know that galas historically have been a big opportunity for fundraising, securing thousands at some organizations, securing millions of dollars for some organizations each year. But now, of course, these in-person galas are no longer possible. They were expensive to produce in the, you know, for all of these years, and they won't be back for some time. So in response, we've been seeing a number of organizations piloting virtual galas. Can you talk a little bit about the historical role of gala as a fundraising mechanism and as a mechanism for engaging your funders and philanthropists, and how this might be adopted to a digital format, or what the future of gala even looks like as a tool in the kind of the philanthropic tool chest? I'd love to hear from you on this, Lori.
Sure. Well, you know, it's interesting because our 50th anniversary gala was planned for March 14th, and we closed March 12th. So we had called off our gala, and it was, you know, it was a special, it was supposed to be a special one because it was the museum's 50th anniversary. And it is, you know, I have to say, I don't know what we're going to do in the future, because I think that there was a moment to say, you know, we have long struggled with this. We are not, you know, we gross about $500,000 on our gala, and it costs about $250,000 or $300,000, which is not a great return on investment for fundraising. And, you know, it takes a lot of staff time, and that cost is not even including the staff time. So you know, we keep doing it because it's tried and true, and we have board members and volunteers who love it. And I will say it is a way that we engage corporations. For some reason, it seems to be much easier for a corporation to write a $10,000 check for a table than it does to write a $10,000 check for operating support, even when they don't even want to come to the gala. It seems that that's just the way they know how to do it. And now we're just really, you know, questioning that. We know that we're not going to get 600 people in a tent anytime this year together, especially the population that attends galas. And I think it's this moment we're actually thinking, you know, maybe that is actually not that aligned with our mission and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to, you know, make our case, and that we could take those resources and that time and put them to much greater effect in different ways. And we haven't decided that, and we haven't fully had that conversation, but you know, there's a lot of folks on our board saying, what about the digital gala? Haven't heard a lot of success with that yet. And we're really thinking that, especially at this moment, how we are shifting in the ways we are engaging our donors and the case we're making, a gala may not be part of our picture in the future. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm personally very interested to kind of unravel and learn more and look beyond the hood of some of the recent virtual galas. Like I know it was last week or the week before, ICA Boston had a gala, has all of the patrons' names listed, but there's no physical event there, and it was open to the public. So I wonder if there was an opportunity for people that bought tickets to convert it into operational funding, yet a beautiful event was produced where they had Virgil Abloh and Sterling Ruby being honored with music and conversation. So I think there's probably maybe the beginning of a trend. I'm interested to.
Well, and it goes back to that blend of the public and the public programming and the donor event, because if you do it virtually, you don't have to keep it exclusive. You don't have to only have ticket sales at the very highest level. So there may be some just rethinking of the model. It's completely.
Thank you. Well, let's jump into one last question about kind of on the coattails of the virtual gala. I want to hear a little bit about potential new revenue streams. I understand that this is so much in its infancy that people are still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, what language, what type of content, what type of channels. But I know, Brian and Lori, you are both working on new initiatives right now to create new revenue streams and create new virtual avenues to engage donors. So I'd love to, hear about and talk through what you've been working on, as well as, speak to the topic of maybe even monetizing some of your programs with your donors, your funders and content more broadly. So Brian, do you have anything that you can speak to about some of the work that you're doing right now in this area?
I'll circle back to that NASH idea, which was the online digital platform for cultural workers to be able to show their creative expressions online. And my organization For Culture was a proud sponsor of the development of that. So I think that early investment at this moment when people are like, what is this? How does it work? How is it different from YouTube? Who's going to actually go to it are essential. So I feel like from a funding standpoint, that's something I'm really proud that we're able to do. Another thing that I'm seeing, which is you can't really call it a new revenue stream. You can call it an efficiency. There's a group locally that's working to try and figure out if some of the back in administrative or marketing or roles could be shared amongst large organizations. And that's something that I'm really interested in supporting as well. There's a need for a feasibility study and to figure out who would be in the tent. So I think that creation of efficiencies is essential. And then one thing I'll tell folks, because when this group came to me and said, hey, we're really interested, maybe we have a shared CEO amongst, then these are some of the larger institutions in Seattle.
Fascinating.
And I said, well, who's coming with you, right? I said, it's right now one cannot bring forward, I think, a request for funding with 5 white-led legacy institutions and not be addressing some way that they're bringing along POC-led cultural organizations with them. So I think when looking for, and I would really recommend and have for years and years within the museum field, these back-end efficiencies of sharing staff, the question is who gets to be at the table to decide who benefits from that. And I think that that's a way that people can lean into their solidarity statements, is in fact to bring people to the table and say, hey, we might have common interest in a staff member. And I think that, depending on how long and protracted this recession is going to become much more of a reality. So I think if museums can jump on that earlier, get the studies in, figure out what it looks like, I think funders will be much more willing to go along to support those efforts.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I do think that we need to rethink what it means to respond to community need. And even Brian, when you were talking about the smaller organizations that don't have the staff or don't have the capability to do digital programming or digital engagement, how can larger organizations, whether that's providing technical expertise, time, staff time, I think there are going to be a lot of organizations that are going to lose their spaces, and museums have some, often have spaces. And how can we respond to community need in that different way? I will say we are not really yet in the place. I mean, we're thinking about monetization, I guess, is what I would say, because we're still so early in this digital work. I mean, we have thought about, do we do things like do a public program, a conversation, with an artist that is first made available to members as a kind of member exclusive and then goes public. So we've thought about it a little bit in that way. But, I think we're still feeling like the even understanding the content that is going to be relevant, what translates. I think we're all learning that, maybe doing a tour of an empty gallery as a virtual tour is not the same as going to a space. And so we are at a place where I think we're really thinking, what is the content that translates best to the digital realm? What do people want to watch? When do they want to watch it? And also equipping our staff and staff people in different ways. I mean, we have a program called Object of the Week, and we have a curator or someone else in staff. It could be a gallery guide, it could be a registrar, talk about an object in the collection. And this is a skill set that we haven't cultivated in a lot of our, staff. And now we're putting them in front of a camera and saying, we're going to put you out there to talk to the world in a different way than they have before. So there are, it makes me think again of codifying all the different realms that we need to rethink and sort of think about the efficiencies, think about the ways we're doing them, and then think about what the revenue implications may be. And it may be just that we're stronger at being able to ask for public and contributed support than it is, really earning revenue in a kind of the way we typically think of monetization.
Thank you. And I love the point, Brian, that you were making about even funding a platform as something that's a little bit atypical, but of incredible value to supporting the creators and the artists in a really kind of broad, widespread way. So really, I look forward to checking out that project personally. And Ben, I'd love to hear from you on this point about things that you're seeing from a global perspective. Again, we understand that now is the experimental phase, now is the ugly duckling phase. People are thinking about it and maybe looking to what peer organizations are doing. Are you seeing anything in the UK or just across the globe right now that strikes you as an interesting step in a new direction around monetizing digital for these organizations?
Well, I think, two observations is that, Europe and the UK is very similar to the US in terms of traditional kind of models, whereas you go into Asia, the museums and galleries that we work there is relatively new. They're getting on stream and they're developing and they're emerging. So, you can't really compare those two markets together because they're at different stages, and what you would have expected to emerge out of Asia probably is going to be quite different if this continues, because the spaces will be designed differently and etc. So I think really, my thought around this is there's an immediate creative kind of boost that we can give in terms of doing things differently and outreach. But the reality is that, as we all know, it depends how long this goes on, and it depends how much energy we have to put into those creative models, and it depends on what kind of an assessment we make in terms of, will things get back to normal and what does normal look like? And I think, so that's a very difficult judgment call to make. And it's the same with all these issues about online galas or, the social interaction element, which at the moment we're all probably, there's an element of being at home and not having to go to work or go to a place of work or going out that, is okay for a few months, but, it goes on for a few years, and it's a different scenario. And you do need that interaction that you get in cultural spaces, and you need to acquire donors through that. And you can't replace that human contact with Zoom calls So, I think there's a lot of innovation that's happening across the world at different paces. I think the big question is, how long will that trajectory go? And then will we see designs, and I'm working with a big concert hall project at the moment, and we've actually, because that's such an early stage design, we've actually redesigned the design to accommodate it to become COVID proof, in terms of, not proof, but in terms of spaces and how those spaces could operate, assuming that we have other pandemics or that we have to deal with this for a long-term period. And other concert hall spaces are struggling because they're working out how to actually, the business model no longer works if you can't have that capacity and if you limited capacity. So I think there's some real excitement in the short term, but longer term, there's some very hard thinking and some very hard walls that we're going to hit around the business models and how we communicate and how we garnish those communities and how we bring them together. So hopefully the innovation that comes out of it will be the great strength that comes out of this moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have 5 more minutes left, so I just want to give a couple quick reactions about something that I'm kind of feeling from this idea of coalition, collaboration, and partnership. Is I honestly feel like because of this digital era we're living in, organizations are open sourcing their successes. They're open sourcing their process. They're speaking more publicly, and there's more eyes and ears interested to learn. So I think, Lori, what you were saying earlier about the kind of the new bonds between organizations in your region, and just looking at webinar formats and op-eds and all of these, elements where people are expressing very loudly what needs to be heard, is going to yield a much stronger and much more innovative, philanthropic landscape. So I'm really optimistic about seeing that. And before we kind of turn the page back to our special guests for closing words, I just wanted to express my gratitude not only for our attendees and our guests and everybody behind the scenes doing all of this great work, but the Western Museum Association for being a driving force in putting this together, as well as all of the organizations like Cultural Innovations that are doing great work in this area and want to help cultivate an international conversation that people from any type of organization can learn from and see something and maybe borrow a framework or borrow an idea and bring back something back to their organization. So really thankful for that, really inspired by all of the points that I've been hearing over the past hour. So to kind of close this off with a nice bow, I'd love to hear from each of our special guests today. If you could leave us with one idea, just one idea we can bring back to our organizations or to our community right now. So I'd love to start with Brian. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one takeaway.
Sure. I don't know how positive this is, but I worked in museums before moving to the funding side for 15 years. And I feel like the thing that the museum sector struggles with the most is a little dishonesty that is really uncomfortable. And I will say that COVID-19 has provided the opportunity for everybody to reveal how challenging it is to run a museum and fund a museum. And we all know it's true, but you cannot have your slip showing at a museum because that is not advantageous for fundraising. And this moment has allowed everybody to say, my God, we're struggling. It is shitty. It is terrible. And as you said, Brendan, how can we share what we're doing and how can you share what you're doing with us such that we can be better and stronger? And for a sector that is so grossly undercapitalized, this idea of collaboration and partnership and sharing and vulnerability, right, is essential for the sector to make it through. So I would just encourage everybody to let your slip show, talk about the things that are so hard that you have no clue how to do and that you have been faking or trying to fake for the past 10, 15 years, and just admit that we are better if we can get a model or a suggestion from somebody else. So I think that is how we combat the inherent dishonesty of the museum field towards a better future.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the candor and the transparency and just the real talk of it all. I think that's important for people to hear. Ben, how about you?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just going to say amen to that because I think that's exactly right. I think what people are hungry for right now is the vulnerability and the authenticity of the conversation. I would encourage people to have real conversations with their funders and their donors about what the institutions are going through, how you're trying to grapple with the challenge. what you're facing. And I think funders, you know, there's a question here about, are they making additional demands? I think they're trying not to make demands, but they want to be more engaged in really hearing how an organization is doing and how they're coming together. So I think I completely agree that right now the takeaway is have the real conversations, the authentic conversations with your donors, obviously internally as well, because I think this is an internal chance for education too, for people internally to understand what philanthropy means to the organization.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ben, what would your big idea be that you'd want people all across the globe to take away from what they should be thinking about, what they should be doing in the realm of philanthropic activity at museums?
I'm allowed two. I'm going to try on two. If that's
you can do two. You can even do three. And if Brian and Lori want to,
I've actually got 9, but I won't do that. That's too much. So I have two thoughts. You know, the world has changed, but also how we interact has changed. And, you know, philanthropy is the love of humankind, mankind. And, you know, a lot of what we're seeing is about that. And we just want to make sure we keep on that trajectory. So don't underestimate how profound this is. You know, we've had the kind of a race towards the highest gain on the stock market, the highest return on investment, the richer I can get. The world has been in that race. And suddenly we've pulled up with this horrific pandemic. It may change just how we interact with each other. And philanthropy may actually come out of this in a way that we never believed it would happen, because just how we look at each other, how we work, the partnership story we talked about, the way we're helping each other, that perhaps we wouldn't have done had this awful thing not happened to us all as a human race. So that's kind of my big idea. But I think in terms of what you can do, so at Global Philanthropic, we thought quite long and hard at the beginning. They said, how can we help and contribute towards the discussion? We actually came up with 9 things. They're on the website, they're on my LinkedIn, so I won't go all of them. But the one, and this is about how to get that right outcome for philanthropy. How do we encourage philanthropy? Because it could go either way. It could, that people, you know, this idea, everyone's got less, right? That's what's going to happen in the depression, recession. Everyone, apart from maybe the super rich, are going to have less than they had before. So, you know, it's this mantra about giving more, even though you may have less. That's the reality of how we're going to grow the pie in terms of philanthropy around the world. And how do we get to that? How do we nudge the dial as professionals? How do we keep talking about things that nudge that dial so that it doesn't go the other way and we end up rather like the post-30s, it became a lot less giving. We want more giving, even though there's less around. And so I've got 9 things, but the thing I would, and they're all published on the website, my LinkedIn, but the thing I would really focus on that is actually creativity, because I think creativity in how we meet these challenges, in terms of how we talk to donors, in terms of how we think about our organizations, is how we partner. That's the key word. Get creative and have faith in that, because that's gonna be the thing that keeps us getting through this.
Thank you for that. And Lori, was your point on Brian's point, was that your takeaway, or do you have, was that your takeaway?
No, that was my takeaway.
Sure.
It was really reinforcing that idea of the vulnerability and the authenticity in our and the transparency.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Brian. This was a really energizing and inspiring conversation. I hope that those of you who have tuned in and will be watching this after the fact, I hope that it's been insightful and educational. And I really think that the opportunity, as Brian and Lori mentioned, for real authentic conversation and creative output is now. So thank you, everybody. I hope you're staying safe and be well. Thank you.